pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Today is my October wrap-up, and I read a substantial pile of books this month, so let's get started. I'm going to organize them from least favorite to favorite, and I think I'll skip doing the star rating. I'll basically, if I hated it, it's 1 star. If I didn't like it, it's 2 stars. If I didn't like it very much, it's 3 stars. If I liked it, it's 4 stars. And if I loved it, it's 5. But I think I'll use the phrases rather than the star rating. See how that feels. So I've got 3 books that I hated. I do worry a little bit about being too negative on BookTube, but I hate a lot of books. I'm going to do a separate video of the many books I bailed on in October, and I obviously hated or wasn't enjoying those, and I decided to put those in a separate video because I thought if I start with my bails, that'll take 15 minutes maybe, and then the ones I hate and the ones I didn't like, nobody's going to stick around to hear about what I like. So I like to focus on the positive, but also I am opinionated curmudgeon, so I'd say 50% of what I read I don't like very much or at all or hate, so that's just me. Also, a lot of these I didn't end up liking because I was forced to find books to fit various prompts for 3 book challenges, which I've basically 99% finished up in October. So I was reading outside my country zone, outside my comfort zone, and not having a very good experience most times. But by the end of 2 years of doing reading challenges, which pushed me outside my comfort zone, I have come to the conclusion that my comfort zone is where I wish to stay. Thank you very much, which is literary fiction only. I hate genre fiction. I can say that now. I've tried enough. And yes, there's been maybe 2 or 3 exceptions in 2 years, but it's not worth the time and money that I spend to find those 2 or 3 in 24 months. So forget it. I'm done. Literary fiction only. A little bit of nonfiction, a little bit of biography, history, whatever. But no, I know where I like to be as a reader. So I had to read a fantasy novel, and I bailed on about half a dozen books this year, and finally found the shortest one I could find, an ebook of a horrible little novella or glorified short story called Old Man Crow by Charles DeLint. To the degree that I was paying attention as I was flipping through the ebook and dying at the abysmally awful writing, I think it was about a man who couldn't decide if he was a wolf or a man, and he was mentoring a young woman musician. Yeah, so this sentence sums up the literary quality therein. That darkness, Old Man Crow said. That was my mortality, wasn't it? She nodded. Okay, so moving right along, another one that I absolutely reviled, and I knew I would, was a horror novel. Again, I bailed on umpteen this year, and finally found a short 2-hour audiobook by Hewlett Packard Lovecraft, and he was as terrible a writer as I knew he would be. So here's one sentence, and I don't even know what it was about. I mean, I was on Twitter, I was watching YouTube videos in silent mode while I was listening to it just to get through it. In the spring after Wilbur's birth, Lavinia resumed her customary rambles in the hills, bearing in her misproportioned arms the swarthy child. I'm going to be a little more careful about this next book that I hated, because I did hate it. And this woman is a goddess in American literature, certainly African American literature, and I expect that I would probably really enjoy Alice Walker's fiction, which I have never read, not even The Color Purple. But I read a new book of poetry by her, which is, and I'm no poetry reader, but I also know crap when I read it. Hard Times Require Furious Dancing is just garbage. I'll just read you one poem. I put this in a Friday in a vlog last week. It's called One Earth. Now, to be fair, they weren't all this bad, but none of them were very good. They were like New Age greeting card verse. That's what they read like to me. One earth, one people, one love. One earth, one people, one love. One earth, one people, one love. Okay. Alice, please stick to prose. Now, the books I didn't like. Again, I had to read, I don't remember what the prompt was. I found a audio recording of a dramatic production of a play, and that was as bad as it sounds. I mean, it's just, the quality of the recording was no good, and the play wasn't very good, I didn't think. The play is called Zoot Suit by Louis Valdez, and the topic was very interesting. It was about racism towards the Chicano community in the 1940s in America, including police brutality and being framed and wrongly convicted. But it was so histrionic, and I hated the acting that I was hearing on audio, and hated everything about it except the fact that it was about 90 minutes long. So I was able to cross that, whatever, I don't remember what the prompt was now. But the next one is the biggest surprise and disappointment of my month, and that was I only ended up, I gave 2 stars to an Ali Smith novel, How to Be Both. So as you may know, this book has 2 sections. One is set in contemporary Britain and focuses on a teenage girl whose mother has just died. And that half of the novel, 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. And the second half was about a Renaissance artist who the teenage girl's mother had been fascinated by. And so he becomes kind of an ethereal character. He's kind of a ghost, but also he's remembering his life in the second half. And that, I never got a visceral connection to that half of the story. It was intellectually interesting at first, but it was very dense writing, or kind of a strange experimental writing style. I'm okay with that to a certain degree. But I felt so connected to the girl in the other half. I know some editions of this book, it has a double cover, so you can open it and read it from starting with the artist and going to the girl, or vice versa. It depends which way you start. This one is more conventional, so I started with the girl and went to the Renaissance artist. But I just never got that connection with him. So by the end of that, I hated it. I hated the Renaissance artist story because I just wasn't feeling anything about it. It was just kind of an intellectual puzzle, and I don't do well with that kind of fiction. That's the kind of experimental fiction that I hate. So I loved Ali Smith's Autumn because it was emotional for me, and so was the first half. But the second half I hated, so I didn't, as a whole, it failed. And I was very disappointed and surprised. So I don't know. I'm coming to the theory that I don't really have favorite writers. I have favorite books. I was talking a little bit with just one reader about this in his comment section yesterday. For a while in my 20s, I thought Michael Cunningham was my favorite writer, but he's written some terrible books. And then next it was Haruki Murakami, and he's written many, many terrible books, but a couple of his are some of my favorites. I thought Ali Smith might be becoming my new favorite writer, but I don't know. Maybe I just have favorite books. Another one last year, Kate Atkinson's Life After Life, one of my favorite novels. I just loved it, and then I went back and read her first one, and I can't remember the title, but I bailed on it. I thought it was just a dog's breakfast, and I couldn't get into it, but I do give a little bit of a benefit of the doubt to writers where I have loved another of their books that, maybe this second book just wasn't at the right time. So maybe in a minimum of 3 years, I might go back and try this How to Be Both again, just like I might try Kate Atkinson's, but I would need at least 3 years to try to get all of my memory of it out of my system before I try it. Okay, moving into more positive territory, but only slightly. The books that I didn't like very much. One is a 1920 novel by E.F. Benson, Queen Lucia. And this is the first of his Map and Lucia series, and I had read, I think it's the third in the series last year, and absolutely loved it. Map and Lucia is the title of that novel, published in 1931, and it was just a literarily satisfying, rich, comedic scream of a novel for me. I just was blown away by it. I talked about it in my introductory video. So I thought, well, I'll go back and start reading the whole series. Now, I had been warned by Thomas of the Reader's Podcast that really Map and Lucia is the only one of the series that is, or it's the best, and the others are kind of so-so. And he was right. He usually is. I didn't like it very much. It was the beginning of the series, so I enjoyed finding out how Benson introduced the characters, and I was surprised by Georgie is Lucia's best friend and confirmed bachelor, and he is so gay in this first novel. So gay! I enjoyed that. He was just flaming. And not in Map and Lucia. 11 years later, Benson had toned that. Here comes the leaf, fall is coming. Benson toned all that down. But that was interesting. But I just felt this was a typical comedy. There was nothing any deeper than just a few amusing incidents. So it reminded me more of, I'm going to blank on his name, Jeeves, the Wodehouse. Am I pronouncing it right? Wodehouse. I know how to spell it. I'm not sure I know how to say it. Let's go with Wodehouse. A series of novels, comic novels, the Jeeves series. And I read one of them, and it was mildly amusing, but that's all. It was just like snack food, and all the stories were the same, so I'll never read another one. Why would you? They're all the same. This one had more of that feeling, but Map and Lucia is a whole other ball of wax, so please check that one out. Another one that I ended up not liking very much, despite a really strong start, is the National Book Award nominated short stories Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. So a new collection this year. The first story is really powerful. It's called The Husband Stitch. And what I probably loved the most was the lush sexuality of this story. There's a strong feminist angle to the story as well, but the sexual life of the main character is just... I almost needed a cigarette at various points. It's really hot, erotic writing. And it's not erotica, it's much more than erotica, but really, really erotic. So that story blew me away, and then I didn't really like any of the rest of them very much. And I felt as the book went on that the stories got weaker and weaker. Like it's just like her started out with her strongest one, and then a bunch of crap at the end. I knew it was only going to ever be a 4-star read or a like instead of a love, because there's a 65-page story in the middle called Especially Heinous, which is telling a story about the two main characters in... I'm such a non-TV person. Law and Order. So Stabler and Benson are the main detectives, are they? So it's a story... an imaginary, fictional story of them, structured through paragraphs titled with the titles of each and every episode of Law and Order. And it was too long and too clever by half, so I ended up bailing on that story about the halfway mark. It's like, this is just too much. So I thought that was a failure in judgment. And ultimately, by the time I got to the end of the book, I had reevaluated the opening story and didn't end up liking it as much, because I just find with this book and a couple other recent novels, there's this trend of cluttering up the story with a whole bunch of little stories, be they urban legends, there's a lot of that in here, or fairy tales, just told in miniature or just pasted in the middle of a larger story. And I just think it's sloppy and not interesting. I just feel like the writer's doing it, hoping it's like throwing something against the wall and hoping it will land and hoping it'll all end up being profound, and it usually isn't, and it wasn't here. So a large part of the husband stitch was that, and I don't like that. In retrospect, that was two novels that I disliked, even though they're very different from her Mikado's writing, but use that kind of let's dump a whole bunch of other facts and anecdotes and stories in the middle of my novel technique were Chemistry by Wei-Ki Wang and Department of Speculation by Jenny Ofel, neither of which I cared for that reason. Okay, now definitely we're into positive territory. Are you still with me? Books that I liked. Book of poetry by the British poet of Zambian descent, Kayo Chingoni, and the word Kumukanda in Luvali, which is an African language indigenous to Angola and Zambia, means initiation, and these poems cover a lot of topics relating to masculinity, immigration, race, and music. And I probably enjoyed the music's poems the best. They reminded me of how much I loved Harry Kunzru's novel White Tears, one in particular. But these poems were great. I usually when I'm talking about poetry, I start waving my hands around because I'm so bloody inarticulate about poetry that I just think maybe my gestures were going to translate something, but I didn't. But that's all I have to say, because I don't know how to talk about poetry. I enjoyed it very much. You can find YouTube videos of him reading it, and he's been on various podcasts, I believe a Guardian Books podcast. The last book on my like list is a political memoir from last year's horrific election. It's called Unbelievable, My Front Row Seat to the Craziest Campaign in American History by Katie Tur, who is an NBC TV reporter, and she was covering the Trump campaign, and you may or may not know that he would regularly single her out while she was sitting in the press box during his rallies when he talked about how much he hated the media. He would call her by name, and the anger of the crowds, she felt, really not safe. So it's her memoir of that, and there's a lot of humor in it, which made it almost disturbingly pleasant to read, because it was all very heavy stuff, and it was stuff that I lived through vicariously watching the campaign. I recommend it. The audiobook, which she narrates, is really great, and she talks so candidly about her employers, NBC, and her rivalry with various NBC journalists. It was not bitchy enough to be bitchy, but it was candid enough to be a little shocking, and I enjoyed that too. And just talking about the rigor of being a journalist, especially during an election campaign. So yeah, I enjoyed it. Okay, now I can get full-throated and passionate about the books that I loved, but I'm already at the 20-minute mark, so I might only be half-throated. I read the Pat Conroy Cookbook, which is a collection of essays. I actually did it on audio, and I do believe it was an abbreviated version. I had to read a food memoir, and I couldn't find anything that I liked. And this introduced me to Pat Conroy, and he narrates the audio. I was kind of hesitant to read anything by him because he's such a deeply emotional writer. I had heard, and I'd seen the movie of Prince of Tides. And I'm a very emotional reader, and I tend to shy away from emotional writers because I often find them too sentimental for me. But I love these essays. They're about food, but I'm not much of a foodie. I just want to eat, but I don't really want to read about food or talk about food too much. But I like good food. But it wasn't the stuff that he wrote about food in these essays that endeared me. It was the way he used food in various restaurants and recipes as a jumping off point to talk about people and experiences in his life, and he's not too sentimental for me. I absolutely loved his writing, and there was so many heartrending pieces here, so I highly recommend the Pat Conroy Cookbook, and I am now going to explore more of his fiction. Another one that I absolutely loved, and I hate YA, and again, there's but one exception, I think, The Fault in Our Stars. But I've had much better luck with middle grade fiction. I love Palaccio's Wonder. I had to do for a reading challenge last year. I had to do a middle grade book by LGBT writer. So I picked George by Alex Guino, and I loved it. It was very sweet. It's about a 10-year-old trans boy who wants to be a girl. The school is putting on a play of Charlotte's Web, and he auditions to be Charlotte, which results in him coming out as trans. And it was really heartwarming. I love the fact that this book exists and should be in every school. The narrator of the audiobook is somebody famous. She's a trans actor on some TV show that I've never heard of, so you can look into that because I don't know about that. Another much-loved book this month was a novella by Edith Wharton, Xingu. I'm only going to say a couple sentences about it, just in the interest of time, and I've talked about it a couple times in recent videos. It's about a hoity-toity book club in 19-teens New York. Upper-class, snobby ladies that are always trying to out-intellectualize the other, and they are auditioning a new member, but they're not sure they should let her in. Is she up to their standards? And they have a guest speaker at one of their, it's not really, I guess they didn't call it a book club, but that's what it sounded like to me, but a salon, and so they invite a published female author to come, and it's just a hilarious scene. I loved it. It made me smile deeply, and you can find it free on the internet. I have done a review video of this one. I was surprised at how deeply I loved this. A manga novel from Japan, My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagame. It's volume 1, which is all that's been translated so far, and I did a review video on it. It's a gay-themed manga, and it really deeply touched me. So please check out my video or anybody else's review, but I loved it. I don't like memoir so much, as a general rule, so I bail on 90% of the memoirs that I try. But everybody said, Sean, the fabulous exception to this is Trevor Noah's new memoir, Born a Crime. I heard him interviewed about it on Fresh Air and here and there and everywhere, and I knew I was going to love it, and so finally I did it on Audible this month, and the Trevor Noah narrates it. And so the first thing to say is that's the only way that you should experience this. Don't even buy the book. Just listen to the audio. It's fantastic. Buy the book, but read it while you're listening, because he does all the various South African accents. And it's probably my best audiobook experience, one of my best audiobook experiences, and it's probably the best memoir I've ever read, or certainly in recent memory, in the last 20 years. It's about him growing up in South Africa, basically with a single mother, Xhosa, black South African woman who's fiercely independent and liberated and doesn't dance to anybody else's tune. And she has a kind of a brief affair with a white Swiss guy and makes a baby, and that's Trevor Noah. And with all the apartheid stuff going on, that created a whole bunch of complications. And it goes from there. It's funny, deeply moving. I didn't realize how subliminally he was teaching me. I've read dozens of books about South Africa, but I felt I learned more from this than any of them. And I've read non-fiction books. And above all else, I fell head over heels in love with Trevor Noah's mother. You have to read this book or listen to the audiobook. Last one. Another book that I absolutely loved. I just finished it 2 days ago. Maggie O'Farrell's novel. I don't think it's her first, but it's one of her earlier novels. The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox. I love this book. It's short, less than 250 pages. When was it published? 2006. It's about a fascinatingly screwed up woman who finds out that she has a great aunt that she never knew she had. She thought her grandmother was an only child. Her grandmother is in the nursing home with Alzheimer's, and her parents are dead. But she finds out she has a great aunt who's been in a psychiatric institution for more than 50 years, who is now being released. And it's that story. And so she ends up, she's kind of a hard-assed younger woman. She's got a screwed up love life, and she's not a very loving person. She ends up very reluctantly kind of starting to take care of this aunt who's Esme and learning her story. and it causes her to start to own her own secret illicit desires. It was perfect. I loved it. The first I've ever read by Maggie O'Farrell, and I know she's had 2 out since then, including a memoir this year, and I will want to check her out very much. That is my October wrap-up. If you are so inclined, check out my Bale wrap-up, which will go up later tonight or probably tomorrow. And otherwise, have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.